Karan Chronicles Live, where we make sense of the global events with straight facts and sharp analysis. Tonight on the show, the world mourns the passing of Pope Francis. How will the world remember him? Also on the show, we will explain what happens next. Meanwhile, US Vice President JD Vance is on his 4-day visit to India. What's on the agenda? Then we expose China's double game. On one hand, China threatens countries from siding with the US, and on the other hand, China is defying Trump tariffs via South Korea. And finally, Pete Hegseth under fire for sharing Yemen strike details in private chat yet again. And starting from today, we are adding a special segment to the show where I will be answering all your questions. So stay tuned for that segment. All this is lined up. Let's begin. He was the Pope who refused the palace, rode in a Ford Focus and embraced the outcast. But he also became one of the most controversial figures in the modern church history. Today we reflect on the life and legacy of Pope Francis, a man who reshaped the papacy forever. When George Mario became Pope Francis in year 2013, he was already breaking traditions. The first Jesuit Pope, the first from Latin America, and the first non-European Pope in over 1300 years. But it wasn't just where he came from. It was what he stood for. He spurned the Vatican's luxury, opted for humility over hierarchy, and began a mission to make Catholic Church more inclusive and less judgmental. From embracing migrants and washing the feet of Muslims to saying, "Who am I to judge?" about the LGBTQ community, Francis brought a softer, more compassionate face to a centuries-old institution. But that compassion came at a price. Conservatives within the church, especially in the United States of America, saw him as a radical threat. They accused him of turning the church into, and I quote, "ship without a rudder." Some even called him a precursor to the Antichrist. He was criticized for allowing blessings for same-sex couples, cracking down on the Latin Mass, and giving women senior roles in the Vatican City. But his response, always calm, prayerful, even when he eventually stripped his critics of their titles and privileges. Francis tried to be a global peacemaker as well, from appeals in Ukraine and Gaza to championing nuclear disarmament. Yet, despite his calls for peace, he couldn't end the war in Ukraine, a failure he admitted weighed heavily on him. He tackled scandals head-on-head, from child abuse cover-ups to Vatican financial corruption. He fired powerful cardinals and called historic meetings to clean up the church. But even with bold reforms, critics and victims groups say it wasn't enough. During the pandemic, Francis stood alone in an empty St. Peter's Square and urged the world to reflect. He said the crisis was a chance for greater reset, to narrow the gap between rich and poor. He also built bridges between Islam, becoming the first pope to visit the Arabian Peninsula and later war-torn Iraq. Conservatives called it heresy, he called it brotherhood. From a working-class family in Buenos Aires to leading 1.3 billion Catholics, his journey was never predictable. Neither was his papacy. Loved by many, criticized by others, Pope Francis will be remembered not just for what he changed, but for what he desired and dared to question. A spiritual leader, a reformer, a disruptor, and perhaps the most human pope of our time. The world is mourning Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of 1.4 billion Roman Catholics, has passed away. He wasn't just the head of Catholic Church. For believers, he was the successor of St. Peter, the original disciple of Jesus Christ. He lived in the Vatican, the smallest country in the world, and held complete authority over Christian teachings, decisions, and the directions. While Protestants and Orthodox Christians don't recognize papal authority, half of all Christians worldwide do. So the question is, what happens now? Well, traditionally a papal funeral is a grand and intricate affair, but Francis wanted something simpler. He requested a modest wooden coffin linked with zinc, scraping the ornate triple coffin ritual. His body will not be displayed on a raised platform inside St. Peter's Basilica as past popes were. Instead, mourners will be allowed to pay their respects while his coffin remained open, but grounded. And in another break from the tradition, he won't be buried inside the Vatican. Instead, he chose the Basilica of St. Mary Major, one of Rome's most sacred papal churches. But while the world grieves, preparations quietly begin for one of the most secretive elections in the modern world, the choosing of the next pope. This process is called conclave. It's carried out by the College of Cardinals. 252 of the church's top officials, although only 138 of them, those under 80, are eligible to vote. The rest can offer their thoughts but not their votes. When the conclave begins inside the Sistine Chapel, yes, the one Michelangelo painted, voting takes place in complete secrecy. No cameras, no leaks, just paper ballots, prayers, and famously the smoke. Black smoke means no decision. White smoke, well, we have a pope. Within an hour, the newly elected pontiff will step out onto the balcony above the St. Peter's Square and introduce himself by his chosen name. Remember, Pope Francis was originally George Mario, but he took the name Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. Technically, the baptized Catholic men could become pope, but realistically, it's almost always one of the cardinals and most oftenly someone from the Europe. Of the 266 popes in history, 217 were Italian. With Pope Francis gone, the Catholic world holds its breath, waiting to meet its next spiritual guide. And just like that, the white smoke is all that separates tradition from transition. In a high-profile visit at a high-pressure moment, US Vice President J.D. Vance has landed in New Delhi, where he is set to meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, on the surface, it's a diplomatic engagement, but, well, behind the scenes, it's all about trade, tariff, and the timing. Vance's trip comes as the world races against the clock. President Donald Trump has imposed a 90-day pause on sweeping reciprocal tariffs, a break that expires on July 9th. With the deadline looming, countries are scrambling to lock in deals before the storm returns. For India and US, two major trading partners, the meeting is more than just a symbolic gesture. It's a strategy. India, which has long enjoyed a trade surplus with the United States currently standing at a hefty 45 billion US dollars, has already begun trimming tariffs on some American goods. But the Washington wants more. India's average tariffs sit around 12%, which is significantly higher than America's just 2%, and President Trump has repeatedly labeled India as tariff abuser. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance, who is accompanied by his wife Usha Vance and their children, brings a personal angle to this visit. Usha's parents hail from Andhra Pradesh, giving this trip a layer of cultural diplomacy. Upon arrival, the Vances visited the iconic Akshardhama temple before the formal talks with Modi and a state dinner scheduled later for the evening. The Indian Foreign Ministry has confirmed what the topics are for the discussion. They have confirmed that discussions will not only cover trade but also regional and global issues, especially relevant with upcoming Quad summit expected later this year, which will bring leaders of the US, India, Australia and Japan together. Notably, Vance's visit follows a string of high-level American engagements with Delhi, first by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, then Assistant Trade Representative Brandon Lynch. You see, the point is that J.D. Vance's visit is not just diplomacy, it's a leverage. With Trump's tariffs hammer waiting to swing back into motion, Washington is dialing up the pressure, and India finds itself at a crossroads. Concede more on trade and risk domestic industry pushback, or resist and face steep tariffs that could shake its export heavily. The Modi government, the BJP-led government, has already taken steps, but whether it will be enough for US, it remains uncertain, because Trump wants more. You see, Vance's Indian family connection softens the optics, but the message is clear. The US wants a reset in trade terms, and it wants it fast. The visit is a stress test for the US-India mega partnership. If both sides can strike a meaningful deal, it might not just avoid a trade war, It would redefine the strategic alliance between the world's largest and oldest democracies in an increasingly transactional world. Let's talk about China now. China has recently warned other countries not to sign trade deals with the US that could hurt Chinese interests. Appeasement will not bring peace, said its Commerce Ministry, and if anyone crosses the line, well, expect retaliation. But dear viewers, here is the irony. Even as China thunders against trade pacts and loyalty shifts, its exporters are quietly trying to sneak goods right into the US, and not under the right red flag, but under the South Korean one. South Korea's custom agency just blew the lid off a scheme involving nearly 21 million US dollars worth of Chinese goods falsely labeled as made in Korea. Over 97% of those were directly headed straight for the US to dodge the tariffs as high as 145% imposed on Chinese goods by President Donald Trump. Among the items caught, well, the surveillance cameras imported from China in parts, then reassembled in Korea, and then shipped out directly to the United States of America. Also caught battery materials passed off as Korean. Some of it is still sitting at port, some has already slipped through. The US has slapped a sweeping 25% tariff on South Korea too, but later suspended it for 3 months, the 90-day grace period that Donald Trump has given to the world. Even so, Korean authorities acted fast. They have launched a task force, alerted the US officials, and vowed to crack down on the origin fraud before it blows back right into their face. Now, while Beijing accuses other countries of selling it out for short-term gains, its Chinese businesses, Chinese exporters are trying to exploit Seoul's free trade pact with the US for their own benefits. Isn't that hypocrisy? Maybe. Well, strategy, definitely, for Chinese. Either way, it's not going unnoticed. South Korea, caught in the middle, now faces the risk of damaging its own credibility with one of its key allies, US. Washington is watching closely, and further violations could cost South Korea more than just the face. And with Trump tariffs pause ending in July, this cloak and dagger trade tricky may trigger even harsher implications, inspections, stricter enforcements, and renewed diplomatic strains. The bottom line is China is playing both the enforcer and escape artist, threatening countries that align with the US while quietly using one of them to dodge the Trump tariffs. In today's trade wars, it's not just the deals that matter, it is the double dealing that matters as well. Anyhow, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is facing scrutiny after sharing classified details about a military strike in Yemen in a private signal chat with his wife, brother, and personal lawyer yet again. The March strike targeted the Iran-aligned Houthis in Yemen, and sources familiar with the situation says Hegseth revealed specific details of the airstrike timeline in the chat, which was set up for administrative purposes during his confirmation hearing. This second leak, following a similar incident last month, raises serious concerns about what? About Hegseth's use of unclassified messaging platforms for sensitive national security matters. This whole leak is very serious. The leak was discovered as part of an internal Pentagon investigation into classified information breaches, and they have found their own member in it. In the first incident, senior US officials, including President Donald Trump's top national security team, were accidentally exposed on Signal chat group, highlighting the vulnerability of such chat platforms for handling sensitive information, especially related to that of defense. Hegseth's wife, Jennifer, who has attended sensitive meetings with foreign military counterparts, and his brother, a Department of Homeland Security liaison to the Pentagon, were among the individuals included in this group, in the Signal group that we are talking about. Now, what did the chat include? The chat included detailed information about the strike, a clear violation of secure communication practices that is followed in the US, especially in Washington. The Pentagon's internal leak probe has already led to the removal of several senior officials, and Democratic lawmakers are now demanding a resignation of Hegseth. Senate Minority Leader Chuck and Senate Tammy Duckworth have both called for Hegseth to be fired, accusing him of putting lives of the US citizens at risk. The revelations come just after Hegseth's advisor Dan Cadwell was escorted from the Pentagon as a part of the ongoing investigation into the leaks, adding fuel to the fire surrounding Hegseth's leadership. He doesn't have an experience in this category anyhow. The White House and Pentagon have not commented on this whole situation, but the ongoing leaks are raising critical questions, serious concerns about the handling of the classified information of the US and its counterparts. Hegseth, who has been outspoken in his efforts to combat leaks, now finds himself in the middle of one, calling into question his own credibility and judgment as the Defense Secretary of the United States of America. As the investigation continues, the political fallout from this breach is mounting and mounting. You see, Hegseth's ability to remain in his position is uncertain, and the leak's wider implication for national security and communication security remains to be seen. The situation is indeed quite volatile. Alright, dear viewers, this brings me to the most interesting segment of our show, a new addition to the Karan Chronicles, and I believe that you will like this, because in this I'm going to answer all your comments and all your observations that you have made in the comment boxes of different social media platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. So let's directly head to our first question, and this question has been given to us by a gentleman in Germany. He writes, German here, the bad joke is in our constitution, right parties are not allowed. They are unconstitutional. The pure existence of AfD is a crime. So this is what this gentleman from Germany writes. Let me give you a little context before I make my observation on this observation. So we recently did a story in which we made a mention of the fact that how the political parties in Germany is thinking of including and engaging with AfD party, which is a far-right party in Germany, which is also considered a neo-Nazi party. So essentially, they are not included in the main parliamentary proceedings. They are not given as much powers and as much authority and as much flexibility as other parties in Germany has, because considering their right-minded nature, their neo-Nazi nature. But the whole point of the story was that their vote share is increasing. More and more people are trusting in AfD. They are giving their votes to AfD. They are giving their appreciation, their trust to AfD. And now leaders are thinking that, the leaders in power are thinking that if they are going to keep on excluding AfD, it could ultimately harm their vote bank. So that was the whole story, and that is the observation this gentleman from Germany has given us. And my take on this is that, well, it is time that AfD should be allowed to, try to present itself as an alternative in German politics. I'll tell you why. This reason is very simple, because more and more people are putting their trust in their appreciation and their vote and their confidence in AfD. So if they will try to keep AfD out of the main proceedings of the parliament for longer, it will ultimately build up and it will backfire and blow up in their own faces. So that is number one observation. And number two observation, now people are very well aware, people are very well knowledgeable about the facts, what has happened in the history, what potentially could happen in the future. So now people are very, I would say, aware and knowledgeable, and people are cautious in their own way, you see. And it is time that AfD should be given a chance to show us what they can do, how they can give a better future to the people of the Germany. But at the same time, I would also like to make a mention of special point before people jump on and make a conclusion about my preferences. It is very important to ensure checks and balances are in place to avoid anything that could go south. For our next comment, let's see what this gentleman writes. He writes, never the powerful, corrupt and mighty will never get arrested, even if they will come out in a jiffy. A common man will get arrested and beaten up if he criticizes politicians, but politicians and rich will never. So first of all, let me give you the context behind this story, why this gentleman has given this observation. We recently did a report on how Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party found themselves in midst of a scandal, the National Herald scandal, in which essentially what they have done, they have bought the assets which were worth billions and billions for just $5 million US. So that was the complete background of this particular observation that this gentleman has made. You see, now my observation on this is that this is something that has existed for centuries and centuries, And this is not the scenario that is happening in India, it is happening across the globe. You see, people who are rich, people who are powerful, people who have their connection, people who have their influence will always get out of the cycle of judiciary, the cycle of legality, the cycle of possible punishment. There are very rare cases when people sitting on the top do something wrong and they are then held liable for it, especially as you mentioned, our viewer mentioned, the politicians and rich people. So if we talk especially about India, they will do scams and then they will run to other countries and then we will fight for years and years and years to bring them back, to extradite them and to hold them accountable for what they have done. And if we talk about politicians, the cases on them will go for years and years and years. And by the time the court gives a decision, most of the politicians are either dead or they are in such a health condition that they cannot bear the possible punishment or the decision that has been given to them by the court. So the observation that you have made is actually quite interesting and it's absolutely correct. But this is how the system is. What can we do about it? All we can do is that we can ensure that we are often doing the right thing and we are staying as much away from all these, I call it a drama, complete drama as much as possible. So that is my observation or a comment. Let's see what other viewer has to say. Our next viewer writes, how India will get opportunities when the leaders who believe in science and technology are not there in our country. So this is something this viewer writes, and this comment is from the same video that we did, that in which we are saying that India has a potential that it can exploit, it can capitalize on because of the Trump tariffs. And the remark made by this gentleman is absolutely correct. And I can give you the solution to it. We have to elect more and more young people to the parliamentary procedures. We have to ensure that more and more educated people, more and more open-minded people, more and more people of scientific ideology and technological viewpoint should come into the democratic processes, into the parliamentary democracy of the country. Because until that happens, the answer to your observation will always be negative. If people in the power are not aware of the opportunities and how these opportunities can be capitalized, the solution and the road ahead is quite dongy. That is my observation. So I believe we have 2 more comments left. All right. This gentleman writes, I'm curious about why China is concerned about the sale of F-16s. The F-16 fighter jets that the Philippines plans to buy are 4th generation, while China is currently developing 6th generation aircraft. Well, your observation is actually correct. It's quite factual. It's absolutely right that the F-16 jet that Philippines is getting is a little old upgrade, and China has much advanced technology when it comes to F-16 air jets. But I believe it's more of a symbolic thing that Philippines is getting F-16. It is more of symbolic gesture that they are saying that when time comes, when China tries to do something fishy with this country, Philippines, they will be able to sort of retaliate, if not defend. That is my point. That is something that I also wanted to mention in that particular story that we did. But in the long run, this is not enough. Philippines need to strengthen them even more because the threat is increasing day by day. But you also have to understand it from this standpoint, which I'm about to tell you. On one hand, we say, Philippines is getting older generation aircraft and whatnot. But my point is that even if you provide Philippines with the best of the best technology available to the mankind in terms of defense, it is very difficult for them to fight Chinese anyway. It is very difficult for them to fight Chinese anyway. Even if they have the 6th or 10th generation F-17, which I know is not into existence at this point of time. But my limited point that I'm trying to make is that it is more of a symbolic gesture, that they have something that they can say we are ready to retaliate with in the initial stages of the escalation. And we also have to understand, in the world that we live in at this point of time, no country is foolish enough to escalate a full-blown war with another country. Especially if you talk about China, it is already facing economic crisis. It's lodged into the war with the United States, a tariff war. And you see now Xi Jinping is a tour of the Southeast Asia country. Recently was out of China to tour the Southeast Asian countries. So there is a shift in the thought process of China as well. The providing of F-16 to Philippines is more of a symbolic gesture than an actual defense gesture, because they definitely cannot fight China with their own defense equipment. So that is my observation, and this brings me to the last comment. So I have actually taken this comment. Uh, First of all, I'll read it, then I'll tell why I've taken it. This gentleman writes, I really liked the way you present the news. I have subscribed to your channel and truly wish you cross 2K subscribers this month. All the very best. Looking forward to your next video. So I'll give you a little background. Earlier, I used to not take all this appreciation, very seriously. I would used to say, all right, they're appreciating me. It's okay. Nothing. It's nothing like that. I used to be that kind of person. But now, as I'm experiencing more and more things, as I'm advancing in my life, this is something that I have sort of felt a change in myself, that I'm becoming more and more open to taking appreciation. And I know if you will look into my comment box, there is not always appreciation, there are also critical constructive feedback, and I'm also open to the critical feedback that you people give to me, because that is the only way I improve, we all improve. But the point that I was trying to make is that in the times when you feel less motivated, in the times when you feel you don't want to create a video, you don't want to write a script, etc., etc., such comments give you motivation, such comments push you forward, that somebody is watching you, somebody is appreciating your work, you are adding value to somebody's life. So these are the comments, these are the perspectives, these are the observations that keeps me going in such times. Dear viewers, that's all I have for you on the show tonight. I will see you tomorrow. Until then, good night and take care.